Each varga is created by dividing a sign into specific numerical divisions of equal degree space. The numerical divisions are based on the corresponding area of life that is being explored deeper. For instance, here we have Aries divided into two sections of 15 degrees space, which is creating a hora, or second divisional chart, related to second house themes of resources, prosperity, and wealth. Gemini is being divided into three sections of 10 degrees space each, creating a drekana, or third divisional chart, which gives deeper insights into third house themes of siblings. And Leo is being divided into 7 sections of 4 degree and 17 minutes of space, creating a Saptamsa, or 7th divisional chart, which is going to give deeper insights into 7th house themes of relationships. Now let's go over how to calculate a Saptamsa D7 chart using the birth chart of Frida Kahlo. Now for this presentation, I am going to be utilizing Ernst Wilhelm's Kala software. And this software calculates the vargas for you. But I just want to briefly go over how a varga is created so that you can get a better understanding of its place in astrological assessment. So in order to calculate where a planet is going to be placed in a varga chart, we need to know two things. We need to know what section of the varga that the planet is going to fall in. And this is based on its degree in the birth chart relative to the divisions of degree space that form the varga. The other thing we need to know is what is the energetic quality of that space that the planet is going into that is going to color the perception of the planet. Now, what do I mean by color the perception? Well, as I just mentioned, Brihatpara Hora Shastra has the formulas for building these tables that we can use to calculate the different divisional charts. Now, this example table that I have is from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 1, by Richard Fish and Ryan Kurzak. And you're going to notice in this table, in the rows going across, you have the numbers 1 through 12 going across in a repeating pattern. And this highlights a really important point for our assessment. And that is that in traditional Vedic astrology, the signs didn't have names. They were simply referred to as sign 1, sign 2, sign 3, and so forth. And it wasn't until the invasion of India by Alexander the Great that Western astrology was introduced into Indian culture, and the use of the names of the signs started to come into practice. So an astrologer in the time before Alexander in India wouldn't say that Mercury is in Leo, he would say that Mercury is in sign 5. It is important to understand that signs are energetic fields where planets, as facets of our consciousness, grow and develop the areas of life that they are responsible for, represented by their inherent nature as karakas, or producers, and also as house lords. When we view signs as energetic fields, we identify them more by the unique energetic qualities and signatures than with symbolic qualities, which are often associated with a name. So vargas are calculated and interpreted by considering signs as energetic fields. When a planet falls in a specific numerical division of a varga, that subdivision will have the exact same energetic quality of one of the 12 signs. The energetic qualities of that sign is going to color the perception of a planet's immediate environment. So we're going to start in our creation of a Saptamsa chart with the ascendant degree, because the ascendant degree is the most important degree point in any chart, because it is the foundational point upon which everything is built off of. And we see that Frida's chart has an ascendant degree of 23 degrees 30 minutes. So we're going to take that ascendant degree and we're going to take it into our table and see where it's going to be placed in the creation of our Saptamsa chart. So we take this 23 degree 30 minute point, that is our ascendant degree, and we go across the Saptamsa table and we see where in the 7 sections it's going to fall. And we see in the 6th section that we have a range of 2126 to 2543. So this tells us that the ascendant degree is going to fall in the 6th section of numerical space in our Saptamsa. Now we need to determine what the energetic quality of that space will be, which is based on the sign we are starting with, which is Leo. And Leo is the 5th sign of the zodiac. So we go down this first column until we see the number 5. And then we move across and we see where it lines up with the 6th column. And there we find the number 10. So this means we're going to place our ascendant degree for our Saptamsa in the 10th sign of the chart, which is going to give us our first house of Capricorn for this Saptamsa. So this tells us that in regards to the body of Frida Kahlo's relationships and partnerships, she's going to view it in a very Capricorn-colored way. She's going to perceive the relationship, she's going to perceive her relationships in a practical and realistic fashion. And there's always going to be a quality of seeking status and security from these relationships, as well as a quality to endure and persevere through difficult times. Now let's look at Mercury. Mercury is in Leo at 6 degrees and 20 minutes. So we take that degree point and we move across the table and see that it falls in the 2nd division of our Saptamsa. Now we go back over to sign 5 and then down and over and across and see where these two line up. And we see that it falls in, we see the number 6 there. So that means that Mercury is going to be placed in the 6th sign of Virgo in our Saptamsa chart. So we look over in our Saptamsa chart in the lower right, and we see that we have Mercury in the 6th sign of Virgo, and we have our ascendant degree in the 10th sign of Capricorn. Now each formula for calculating a varga will have different ways of determining where a planet is going to be placed in that varga, as well as what energetic quality that space is going to reflect. But all vargas are built upon the principle I've just outlined of taking the degree and sign position of a planet and using those factors for determining its placement in the creation of a specific varga. Let's explore the path of Frida Kahlo's relationships as seen in her birth chart, and then explore it in the relevant vargas. And we're going to start by looking at her first house to see the path of her life as an individual. Kahlo was a Leo ascendant. Typically, Leo ascendants are people who have a strong will and sense of themselves. They're intelligent people, and they like to be noticed and acknowledged, and they tend to want to shine over and dominate their environment and those around them. And the path of Leo is very much the path of a king who is willing to make any sacrifice for the establishment of their kingdom. So there's going to be a strong sense of will that's going to help them to do this, but that strong sense of will can also get in the way of co-creative partnerships, as that urge to rule and dominate and put one's agendas first is going to get in the way of co-creating with another person. So the sun is the lord of the first house, and we see that the sun is in the 12th house of Cancer. The sun is both the ascendant lord, and it's also the natural karaka of the self, indicating that Kahlo's path in life was strongly focused on the 12th house. And the 12th house is a house of loss and also confinement. It's a Dustana house, a house of suffering. So the things of the 12th house bring suffering by making things expensive. The cost of having them is just too high to keep them around. And Kahlo would spend long periods confined to her bed due to her chronic illnesses. The 12th is also a house of dreamlike states. And Kahlo's painting had a dreamlike quality about them that she said reflected her sense of the world. The sun is in a great friend's dignity in the 12th. So that's going to give strength to its agendas as a first house lord. Jupiter is with the sun, and Jupiter is exalted. So it's going to bring a lot of grace and good fortune to the sun. Jupiter is the ruler of the 5th of creativity, and it's also the ruler of the 8th of sudden breaks and changes as well as chronic illness. So these Jupiterian things are going to be part of Kahlo's life path. Rahu is also with the sun in the 12th. And Rahu with the sun tells us that there will be confusion and insecurity with a person's sense of individuality. Outwardly, Kahlo will seem confident, willful, and charismatic, but inwardly, these qualities are actually missing. And so her expressing them is more out of a desire to actually embody them than due to the fact that she actually really possesses them. The moon is the lord of the 12th. It is Rashi aspecting from Taurus, which is its Mula Trikona sign. This makes for a strong moon, but that moon is also waning. So the things of the 12th house are going to have a waning quality to them, which means it's going to be difficult to keep them in a person's life. They're going to tend to wither and fade away and eventually leave the person. So the last 4 years of Kahlo's life, she experienced an increase in her chronic illnesses, and she was very much alone. And it was during this time that her right leg was amputated. And so it was a very dark time where she went through a lot of physical, emotional, and mental pain to the point that she became suicidal. The moon is also Kahlo's Atmakaraka. So we have all three self-indicators, all concentrating on this 12th house, making for a very strong life path centered on misfortune, confinement, and liberation. Now Mercury is in the first house, and it's in a great friend's dignity. And this is going to give manifesting strength through giving a sharp and inquiring mind to the person. Mercury is a Vyasha planet, and Vyasha is one of the 4 castes, and it's the artisan or tradesperson caste. And so Mercury is going to bring skills as an artist to the body of the person due to its position in the first house. And Kahlo taught herself to paint, and she developed her technique when she was bedridden for several months after the bus accident. Now Mercury rules the 2nd and 11th houses, and because of its excellent dignity, it's going to indicate a very strong capacity to earn through one's own efforts and to realize the success of one's ambitions through social relationships. Mercury is also Kahlo's Darakaraka, or the Karaka planet that represents the spouse. So having the Darakaraka planet in the first house indicates that one's partner will be very much tied to the person's identity and the body of their life experience. We also have Mars and Ketu in the 6th house, Rashi aspecting the first house. Mars is exalted here, and it's going to bring passion and a desire to exercise one's will through activity to the first house, through the body, through the personality. But the presence of Ketu is significant, and Ketu in the 6th indicates a person who in past lifetimes derived security through the application of hard work and intelligence to overcome life's difficulties. But see, in this lifetime, that external security is going to fall away. It's going to become unrealized and unfulfilled. Because no matter how hard they try, no matter how much they put their efforts and their work and their intelligence and their skills and their logic towards these things, it's just not going to come together for them. And this is going to create a lot of fear and doubt and uncertainty around a person's external security. Because the goal of Rahu and Ketu ultimately is to develop inner security, to handle and meet the outer instability that is going to be a part of a person's life experience. To look at relationships, we need to start with the 7th house, the house of partnerships. The 7th house is in Aquarius, and Aquarius brings energies of the 11th sign to the 7th house, indicating that the person is going to seek security through one's social and political relationships, and these are going to be part of their concrete experience of partnerships. Saturn is the lord of the 7th, and Saturn is in the 8th house of Pisces. And this is not a good placement for Saturn because the 8th is another Dustana house. It's another house of suffering. And the way that the 8th house brings suffering into a person's life is it's going to bring sudden breaks and changes that literally come out of the blue. So there's a certain amount of vulnerability associated with the 8th house because it brings these unforeseen events that are just totally beyond your control. Saturn is an enemy's dignity here. According to the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, having the Lord of the 7th in the 8th as a negative is going to put relationships in a state of constant crisis. It makes the person's mate prone to affairs, and there can be a lot of overanalyzing on the insecurities around one's relationships and a lack of happiness in connecting with others. When Saturn is distressed, it can make one give in to their worst fears and impulses, pushing them into self-gratifying and self-validating behaviors and activities. Because this is happening in the 8th, it can make a person seek extramarital affairs and experimental relationships. Frida had numerous extramarital affairs with both men and women. Now, Jupiter, Sun, and Rahu are aspecting the 7th house from the 12th. Jupiter is going to bring 5th and 8th house affairs to the 7th house of relationships. So themes of creative expression and chronic illness are going to be part of Kahlo's relationship experience. Jupiter is also the natural karaka or indicator of one's spouse in the chart of a woman or in the chart of a person who is attracted to men. So Jupiter's exalted status tells us that there will be benefits in creativity and wealth coming from the spouse, because the 8th house also represents inherited wealth or wealth that comes from others. Now, in addition to being a house of relationships, the 7th is also the house of relating to the public. Sun is going to bring first house qualities of the body and one's identity to the 7th house of relationships and the public. Rahu will stimulate the need for inner security through one's long-term relationships. As the outer security of these relationships becomes broken and falls away, it's going to push Kahlo into looking deeper inside for inner security. What we find here is that for Kahlo, partnerships will be centered around the connections that were part of her social life, that the concrete aspects of the relationships will be focused on how it relates in the context of her social and political relationships. Kahlo's husband Diego was well established in the social and political circles of his artistic community. The Karaka planet that indicates him, Mercury, is in Kahlo's first house, and so this is tying him to her life path and to her identity, as it was so with all of her partners, and to a certain extent with the public as well. So many of Kahlo's extramarital affairs were with individuals that she saw as peers or mentors within these circles. Creative self-expression, chronic illness, identity, and a drive towards inner security were all part of the life path of Kahlo's experience in relationships. Relationships that were all concretely rooted in a bodily experience around her social and political connections. Now let's look at the Saptamsa and see how Kahlo is going to feel about her relationships. We have an ascendant in Capricorn, and this tells us that Kahlo viewed the body of her relationships in a Capricorn-colored way. She will perceive these relationships in a practical and realistic fashion. There will also be a quality of seeking status and security from these relationships, as well as a quality to endure and persevere through difficult times. Now, in every Varga, there's going to be important planets that are going to be key for understanding how that area of life is going to unfold for the person. Each Varga has a primary Karaka. The primary Karaka planet usually has an energetic quality as a natural Karaka that matches the area of life that is being explored. How a primary Karaka is doing in a Varga really sets the tone for just how that area of life is going to be perceived by the person. So when we look at the Saptamsa for Frida Kahlo, we're going to look at Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury because these are all going to be important planets for her. Saturn is the lord of the 7th house in the birth chart. Jupiter is the natural Karaka of the spouse, and it's also the primary Karaka for the Saptamsa. And then Mercury is the Dara Karaka planet. And then we're also going to look at the Sun because it is the natural Karaka of the self. So Saturn is in an enemy's dignity in the D7. Saturn is benefiting from a Rashi aspect from exalted Mercury, which will help to manifest relationships in Kahlo's life. and give her the capacity to communicate and manage her relationships well. She's going to feel that she's on top of them. But Saturn is also suffering from a Rashi aspect from Rahu in the D7, which is going to cause confusion and result in cravings and desires that can pull her into sexual experimentation. Ketu is also Rashi aspecting Saturn, and it's going to create frustration and obsessions around creativity as a spiritual experience. Kahlo engaged in bisexuality and extramarital affairs with individuals whom she felt were her creative and intellectual peers. And this is something that you could view in the context of, like a lot of artists who rationalize such behaviors as part of chasing a muse of creativity and in an exploration of their creative expression. Jupiter is in neutral dignity in the D7. Jupiter is with Mulatram-Kona moon, indicating that it has the capacity to receive creative inspiration and create a legacy that will live on after Frida's life, and that's going to be strong in that legacy. However, the Rashi aspect from Mars in Libra is going to tell us that legacy will suffer from a lack of understanding the principles she was trying to impart through her work. Kahlo said that her paintings weren't surrealistic, they were representations of her own reality as she saw it. This is going to translate into her relationships, where individuals are going to have a difficult understanding the principles that she is trying to convey in her relationships, and consequently, it might seem outwardly surreal to them and somewhat imposing and grandiose. Here we have an example of just how important the Vargas are in astrology. Now, in Frida Kahlo's birth chart, Jupiter was exalted in Cancer, but here it is neutral dignity in the Saptamsa. So this tells us that concretely, Kahlo is receiving the benefits of an exalted Jupiter in her concrete life, experience. So in regards to relationships, because it was aspecting her 7th house in the birth chart, she's going to feel that effect, and it's going to manifest a relationship for her. But in the Saptamsa, that Jupiter is in neutral dignity. And so this tells us that while concretely she has an exalted Jupiter that's bringing her wonderful things and manifesting them in a great fashion and an exalted fashion, in a Saptamsa, she's going to perceive relationships in an average way. She's not going to see them from an exalted view. And remember, Jupiter represents optimism and the ability to see things from a larger perspective. So in that regard, she's going to view relationships in an optimistic way, but it's going to be in an average optimistic way. It's not going to be exalted. And so she's going to see things only from the bigger picture perspective in an average way and not an exalted way. So this is why these Vargas are so important, because you might look at the birth chart and say, well, she has an exalted Jupiter, and think things are going to be wonderful. And it's only by looking at the Saptamsa that you see, well, it might be wonderful, but she's perceiving them as being somewhat average in her life. Sun is exalted in the D7, and it's being Rashi aspected by Venus from Scorpio. And this indicates that one's creative spirit will be sustained through the enjoyment of intercourse. Kahlo's liaisons had the potential to support her creativity. However, with Venus, it's all about balance. Venus is in an enemy's dignity in Scorpio, so it's going to be stressed. And so that's going to indicate that these liaisons aren't going to bring that balance, and they're actually going to do more harm than good and offer up more distractions than any real inspiration. So what does all this tell us? Well, it tells us that Kahlo's personal relationships were rooted in social and political relationships. This was the foundation. This was the body and personality of her personal relationships. Things like identity, creative self-expression, chronic illness, and a drive towards inner security were all part of that concrete path of those relationships. But we found that there's going to be trouble in her understanding her beliefs to the extent that she's going to be able to express them to her partners in a way that isn't going to come off as being surreal or grandiose. And that's going to make a person feel isolated and drive them into things like extramarital affairs out of a desire for connection, identification, and out of a need to find creative fulfillment through those partnerships, which is really the result that we all seek in having relationships, which is having them to bear fruit in some way that makes us feel good and creative beings who can express ourselves fully.